You're listening to God, Law, and Liberty with David Fowler and Gary Humble. We're putting culture on a collision course with the truth.
Welcome to another episode of God, Law, and Liberty. I'm Gary,
and I'm David,
and we're kind of continuing from last week. David, you and I we talked about. Well, I made the comment, probably not so nice, that people suck, but whatever. That's kind of how I roll. And but just this idea that, wait, you know what? I wanted to say something too. I feel like I want to start a new segment in our weekly episodes. We should have at least 60 seconds where we at least talk about a dumb tweet of the week. And since we're in Tennessee,
okay,
I just saw this thing come across my feed, and what it's like. Who is it out in California? He's a representative, Ted Lieu or whatever, and he was, and actually he was on the House committee that impeached President Trump, and this guy's been on Twitter and on the news. I mean, since the president's inauguration, he's been one of those, impeach the guy, from the very beginning. And anyway, he tweeted yesterday or this morning at Donald Trump and at Governor Lee about that we shouldn't be opening up our state for business because Tennessee has not been following or is not yet decreasing in COVID cases for the last 14 days. So how dare Governor Lee open up the state of Tennessee because he's not following the guidelines set forth by the president? And my thought to that guy is, when was the last time you cared about any guidelines set by President Donald J. Trump? I think they need to let Tennesseans run Tennessee, and he needs to run his homeless compound on the West Coast he's got going on over there. So anyway, just my dumb tweet of the week.
Well, that's why people are leaving California in droves. Every day.
Yeah. So anyway, they're going to Texas, and before I left Texas about 4 years ago, and kind of one of the sayings there is don't California my Texas. We can say the same thing about Tennessee.
Yeah, absolutely right.
One of the things we talked about last week that really came from this idea came from the Federalist Papers, that man is depraved. In fact, in Federalist 6, Hamilton said that men were ambitious, vindictive, and rapacious. And
that's right. And
so we talked a good bit about morality and how morality plays into good government.
Sure.
That's sort of the morality of the people who are governed, who consent to government, kind of drive the way government goes. I
think we said we could consent to bad government if we're stupid enough.
Absolutely, certainly.
That's right.
And so today we kind of want to continue that conversation into how that affects the Constitution. And you had some great material here about how we interpret the Constitution, and of course, courts use their power of interpretation all the time to essentially amend the Constitution.
That's right.
And
that's right. Well, so one of the things that we've talked about many, many times is that because of what you said, our founders believed in the depravity of man. That was actually the word, if you remember, in one of the Federalist Papers. I think it was 10, maybe it was 6, I don't remember. But we built a government of checks and balances. And because they had seen the effects of the concentration of power in kings, the divine rights of kings, and all of those things, they actually split the atom. That's the word, a phrase that former Justice Kennedy used. They split the atom of sovereignty in the United States between the federal or national government, you might say, and the state governments, to serve as a check and a balance on the organism of government getting too big and destroying the fundamental pre-political rights that the people had under the common law. So we've had Adam McLeod on talking about the common law.
Yeah.
And that the common law recognized out of natural law that there were certain things that were true, and the importance of life, liberty, and property, which made their way into the Fifth Amendment. You can't deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. That made its way into the 14th Amendment. It's important to note, and most people do not draw this distinction, but we have certain rights as citizens, okay? But due process, which says you can't deprive a person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, applies not to citizens, but to any person, because that's inherent in the nature of having been made by God, created by God.
Right. Any person, no matter if you're a citizen of the United States or not. You're a person.
That's right. Any person.
Yeah.
That's
you
right.
deserve due process.
You deserve due process.
Yeah.
And that's been lost. But the thing we've said over and over and over, and we'll say it over and over and over, is the quote from de Tocqueville that if the lights go out, they'll dim over time. We won't really realize why we have the rules we have, where they came from, how we got them, why they are the way they are. We'll make a bad use of them, and we'll destroy ourselves. And you actually been taking this constitutional class through Hillsdale, and somewhere, I guess, you ran into this speech by President Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah, it was a speech in 1912 by Woodrow Wilson that he gave as he was campaigning for president. A lot of this,
right.
It's really interesting going through some of this material, because we can sit here in 2020 and, this sort of war we have going on culturally, where half of the country is conservative, half the country is liberal and wants to see everything change and blow up all the foundations. They were having these same conversations over 100 years ago. This is not a new thing, but right. A lot of these progressive
and they were wanting to blow up the foundations then a little bit.
Then, absolutely.
Yeah, that's right.
And they succeeded to some degree.
And they've succeeded. Yeah, in large part they have.
When you hear, when you think about that, and you hear some things that Woodrow Wilson said in the speech, and you realize that he was elected. The people elected him based on these ideas. So there was a lot of division, even back then in our country. And one of these things,
we were moving in the wrong direction 100 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll get into the Newtonian Darwinian thing here for a minute, but one of the things that he said that I really sort of saw and thought, wow, that really speaks to just the complete godlessness of this type of thinking. He said, I used to say, when I had to do with administration of an educational system, this is Woodrow Wilson, that I should like to make the young gentleman, and you can imagine, a professor in the university. This is what we're
Princeton.
sending our kids
Wasn't
to.
It at Princeton?
He eventually he was at he graduated from Johns Hopkins, and I think he was there for a bit. He eventually became the headmaster, whatever you call it, of Princeton University. Yeah,
right.
And he said, I should like to make the young gentlemen of the rising generation as unlike their fathers as possible. Not because their fathers lacked character and intelligence or knowledge or patriotism, but because their fathers, by reason of their advancing years and their established position in society, had lost touch with the process of life. They had forgotten what it was to begin. They had forgotten what it was to rise. And here's the key. They had forgotten what it was to be dominated by the circumstances of their life. And so here you have a man who, first of all, says, I want young men to be nothing like their fathers, and which means just throw all the foundations out. Mm-hmm. And secondly, the reason is because grown men have forgotten what it's like to be dominated by circumstances. Well, when is that a great thing? When should all of our decision making and everything we think about life be dominated by our circumstances? I mean, that's the complete opposite of what we hold to be true in Scripture.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, what does God say? I'm the God of your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Hey, when you cross the Jordan River to go into the new territory, put these stones out here so that your children will say, what do these stones mean? Actually, I'm going to do something you shouldn't do. I forgot about this, but right here on my bookcase. Oh, it fell apart. Our set of stones that we actually, as a family, I don't know if they can see it, went down to a river near us, and we pulled out 12 stones and put this little plaque on it.
Oh, wow.
So that from time to time in our family, we would pull this out and say, what do these stones mean? And we'd recount to our daughter how God had worked in our family's lives and our marriages and in our marriage. And so God's always saying, remember, remember, remember. Don't despise the older generation.
Yeah.
And he's wanting to just tear up everything from the roots, it seems like. And that's a fool in the biblical perspective. It's a fool.
Yeah.
And that's who he elected.
And it's who we elected, and of course that led to a progressive era of eventually leading to FDR and the New Deal, and Teddy Roosevelt,
right.
and then now
FDR.
Now post 1965, this just super modern. I guess they call it the new left. I mean, they're so left that they don't even they've abandoned the old progressive ideas and just gone completely off the rails, which is where we are today. So we want to talk a little bit about how that new system and new way of thinking, that progressive mindset, has impacted how we look at the Constitution,
Sure.
and reinterpreted the Constitution in ways that we never thought possible.
Sure. One of the things, and I do want to talk about the Constitution here, but as I read Wilson's speech, you got to remember that Darwin came up with his book in 1859. In the late 1800s, Darwinian thought began to take over at Harvard. It began to work into all the other subject areas. And in that speech that you were reading from, he made a statement here that we talk about the living Constitution, and so this ties in a bit to the to Wilson. Because he said this: the trouble with the theory, and he's talking about the current theory of government in 1913, is that government is not a machine, but a living thing. Okay, so we got a living Constitution. Then he says this: it falls not under the theory of the universe, but under the theory of organic life. Okay, so he's kind of moving from this very, very transcendent thing, the theory of the universe, to what's taking place here, what's taking place right now. It is accountable, notice this, to Darwin, not to Newton. So he's saying, see, we need to understand government from a Darwinian viewpoint. It's
in other
not
words,
governed,
constantly changing. He's saying the Constitution isn't tied to anything immutable.
That's right. We just adapt things to whatever's going on, which opens the door to pragmatism, which says there is no right or wrong. It's just what works. And when that stops working, we just go to what next works. And then when that stops working, we just go to what next seems to work. We never develop the law from any fundamental principle, because Darwin has no fundamental principle. Everything is chance, random mutations. We're not really going anywhere.
Yeah.
If anybody asks, what's the purpose of American government? I don't know that we'd know. I think our founders would have said the purpose of the American government is to make sure that on a national level we can defend ourselves from foreign enemies, do things that we can't do separately, and otherwise promote liberty by allowing the atom of sovereignty to be split between the national government, which only does national things that we can't do apart from each other, and otherwise let you move from California. If you want to go live in dung-filled streets with people sleeping, move to California. That's a great place for you. You don't want to live that way? Come to Tennessee, go to Texas. So they don't even have a theory of government. And so he says Darwin leads to mere innovation. Well, excuse me, that's what I said. But he said, so you just modify things to fit the environment, to take shape by what's going on. And then he says this: no living thing can have its organs offset against each other. So in other words, if I offset my heart against my lungs or my lungs against the heart, he's saying the organism dies, right?
Yeah.
And I want to say that's exactly right, President Wilson. They wanted the organism of government to be on life support all the time. They wanted it to be constantly checked and balanced. because they didn't want big centralized government trying to do whatever in its own innovative determinations government now ought to do.
Yeah, the progressive issue with the Constitution is that it creates too many stumbling blocks for the things that they want to do. But that's the point.
Yes,
the Constitution was written in such a way that it does slow you down and forces you to jump hurdles and go through checks and balances so that you're not so quickly changing everything on everyone and just ruling by the thought of the day.
Yeah, that's right. And what's interesting is we now know with Darwin, there's never been a positive random mutation. They're all destructive. Now, we forget that and assume that somehow these mutations produced life, but we've yet to find really the mutation that's not negative. And so it's just fascinating to me that in our country, in this period of time, we would elect a man who says we need to govern according to Darwinian principles. If that doesn't show that the American religious institution was hollowed out over 100 years ago, I don't know what does.
Yeah, it's incredible.
They would have never elected him, 100 years before that. Of course, we didn't know about Darwin then. But getting back to our discussion about the Constitution, is the problem is when we forget why we have what we have, we develop in random ways that are not organic, I guess is the best way to say it. And one of the biggest violators of that is the United States Supreme Court. And I've been recently working on this abortion issue, as you know. And as I read some of these opinions, I just think, why did we not have people in the United States government who impeached some of these judges? I mean, they should have just impeached them. But
which is what the impeachment power was really there for.
Yeah, they said, look, if you upset the balance of powers and change the equilibrium of our government, then we ought to remove you. And surely they would.
It wasn't just to go after presidents like we do today. It was to go after rogue judges.
Yeah, that's right. So one of the cases that I was reading, there was Justice Sutherland, and it's from 1937, but he was talking about this notion, which we need to delve more into at some other point, called substantive due process. That due process isn't about procedures. Did we send Gary to jail without giving him notice of the charges and having a trial and a jury and and all that? It's substantive somehow, and that's what they used to give us Roe versus Wade, this substantive due process notion, and that's what they used to give us Obergefell and same-sex marriage. But in 1937, he said this. He said, the judicial function is that of interpretation. It does not include the power of amendment under the guise of interpretation. Now that's a great statement. To miss the point of difference, he says, between the two is to miss the point of the supreme law of the land and what it stands for. And he actually makes the statement that if the Constitution were bent to circumstances or modified public opinion, then that person has breached their oath of office. He calls it reckless disregard of the official oath and public duty. How do you like that? But that's exactly what we're doing. Remember what Justice Ginsburg said before the Obergefell case? I think America is now ready for same-sex marriage, as if that had anything to do with it.
Who cares if America's ready or not? That's not a constitutional principle as to whether America is ready or not.
Yeah, there's not any "is America ready" clause in the United States Constitution. There's a way to fix it. You amend the Constitution. That's how you fix it.
Right.
Actually, there's another great quote from one of the early Supreme Court cases, and it's picked up again, where it said, look, the Constitution was written in broad general powers. It doesn't. It's not written like a code. I think Tennessee has 70 something volumes of laws that are each hundreds of pages thick. Okay, the Constitution is a pretty short document. And they said the purpose is we don't know what all is going to happen in the future. We're laying out broad general principles, and Congress will mold its powers in order to adopt the ends and the purposes for which the government is established, not the courts.
Right.
I mean, we've literally turned everything upside down because of people like, Woodrow Wilson and FDR, and the law schools have produced these judges.
Well, to that note of even, in the progressive era, not
Yeah, I was going to say, I think error
it is
was
a progressive
better word.
error,
Yeah,
but I'm
right.
talking about the progressive era.
Yeah.
But one of the things you mentioned there about the broad strokes, where the originally the way this thing's supposed to work is, the Constitution paints broad strokes, then the legislative process is supposed to come in and put in the policies that gets the thing done, right? But
Right.
even in our administrative state, we've even screwed that up. Now we're in a situation where the legislature, if they even make a policy, makes a really broad policy, and we have all of these administrations now, the EPA and the FCC and the SEC and all these organizations that really they're doing the legislative work on their own. I mean,
Yes.
the legislature, Congress has just delegated all of that policymaking authority to these administrations, and we live in what we call now an administrative state.
Sure.
So the whole thing, these administrations and the courts, we live in a day and age where the people really have no power, even through electing people to the House and the Senate. You can say, well, we elect our representatives, but at the end of the day, it sort of doesn't matter who's in that position because the administrations are making the policy anyway.
Well, and here's the thing, that they should take back on their administrative agencies, and they don't. Now, I'm going to just tell you one little war story. It's a small thing, but in the state legislature, I was on the Judiciary Committee. There were 9 of the 9 members were all lawyers, and the Judicial Ethics Committee would not give us any continuing legal education credit for serving as lawyers on the Judiciary Committee. Okay, we're over here making the laws that in the continuing legal education class they're going to be talking about. Okay, so we're going to go to a seminar and hear about laws that we've passed.
You're actually doing the deal. Yeah,
we're doing the deal. Yeah, we get no credit for having spent 2 hours week after week after week after week, and the ethics committee just wouldn't reconsider. So a Democrat, Jim Kyle, made a motion in our committee to abolish the ethics commission. It passed 9-0.
Wow.
We'll show you, you little board we created. We'll just close you. Well, guess what? We got a letter saying we're going to start giving you credit for that. We had another board for psychologists, and their lobbyist told us that certain things were happening at the university level. As it turned out, he was not honest with us. And so the next year, we came back and we voted 9-0 to abolish the psychology board and move all psychologists under the medical board. We got their attention. The lobbyist actually got fired and never came back to the legislature.
Yeah, guess who has the constitutional power to do these things?
That's
the
right.
legislature.
That's right. And our Congress is so weak and so uninformed and so ill-formed that they don't even try anymore.
And this really goes back.
I'm going to get off on my soapbox if I'm not careful here.
Well, every time we get into one of these discussions, too, I always think back to you and I we did an episode. We talked about the Fourth Amendment quite a bit, and then specifically we got into Clause 5, where the idea is that we live in a day and age where we depend on the courts to fix all of these issues and reinterpret this and interpret that and fix this. And the truth is, not only did the Constitution give the power to the legislature to do that, to make and amend and change policy, But even in something like the 14th Amendment, I mean, specifically wrote in the Clause 5, if there's an issue here, that issue doesn't belong in the court. It actually belongs in Congress. It's Congress who has the power to fix any discrepancies that may come out of this amendment. And we've lost all of that. It's all gone.
Sure. Yeah, you're talking about Clause 5 of the 14th Amendment that says if states are violating the rights of national citizens, Congress steps in and passes a law and says, y'all can't do this.
Yeah, not the court.
Instead, the
Congress.
Yeah. So the courts make it up, or because Congress abdicates, the courts then step in. I literally was in court about 2 years ago over the marriage issue in Knoxville, and the lawyer for these two women who were married and they were going through a divorce, and it was now a child custody dispute issue, said, Your Honor, the legislature has not kept the law up with current circumstances that now deal with in vitro and all of this stuff and now same-sex marriage, and you need to bring the law up to date. That's what she said to the judge. And unfortunately, the Attorney General agreed with her, and that's what the judge did. I was just flabbergasted. It's not the judge's job to make the law up to date. This is the law. If you want to live by it, that's great. If you don't want to live by it, then you will suffer some consequences because life will be messy for you.
Right.
I'm sorry. You don't go get to run to the courthouse and get a judge to change it. But one of the things I also want to bring up here in this Darwinian thing, and we're probably, for listeners, we may feel like a pinball machine a little bit, but one of the things that caught me about Wilson was this Darwinian notion, and that we're trapped sort of in this historical constitution that's just not fitted right anymore for current circumstances, and we just need to change. And of course, that's partly what led to the administrative state you were talking about. But there was a statement, a book I would recommend to anybody to read. It's only about 100 pages by C.S. Lewis. It's called The Abolition of Man. It's a chilling book and very prophetic in some ways. But he talks about the fact that throughout history, we have had certain moral values. The Chinese had the Tao. The Hebrews had the Old Covenant, and the Christians, and so on and so forth. And even, so all the great religions of the world, philosophy of the world, have all had a very similar moral code. And so over time and over history, we came into our country with this understanding of common law that there are three absolute rights: to life, to liberty, and to property. And we had narrowed those things down so that one person's liberty didn't take another person's property or their life. Another person's property didn't take away somebody else's liberty or property. And we'd work these things out. And so those are fundamental things. And what happened, what C.S. Lewis says is, you can still make progress. And I love what he says, is that you can still make moral advances. So he says, from Confucius having said, don't do to others what you don't want them to do to you. So you don't want them to beat you up, you don't beat them up. To the Christian, do as to others,
right,
as you would have them do. The affirmative idea, don't just not do the harm, but do the good to others. Yeah. He says, now that's a real advance. That's good. That's within and consistent with the underlying principle.
It's taking what was there and truly making it better, enhancing it.
Making it better. It is progress, okay? He says, but what happens is people arbitrarily wrench from their context something from the whole. They swell it up to madness in isolation, and they destroy everything. So think about this with abortion. We have this notion of liberty. They take the concept of liberty out of context of life and property, They exalt and swell it up to something that has no relationship to anything else, and now you can kill your baby. You see? And that's madness, because what you would need to say is, hey, where did you get the notion of liberty anyway? One of the frustrating things for me is the Supreme Court talks about that the state has an interest in life. Well, I agree. But you know what the Supreme Court has never said? Why? Why does the state have an interest in life? Where did it come from?
That's a great point.
Yeah, you have liberty. I agree. Well, where did it come from?
Yeah, why?
And what was the nature of it? So what would this be progress towards? I can now use my liberty not just to move around, but to go hire a doctor to kill a baby? Well, that's not progress. That's a complete break from the past and an innovation. And I love what C.S. Lewis does. He's so funny. He says, this is the difference, what I'm talking about, is between a man who says to us, so you like your vegetables moderately fresh? Well, why not grow your own and have them perfectly fresh? Now, see, there's an improvement. There's progress. I'm getting them from a can at the grocery store, and I really like that. But wow, you're right. I could grow them in my backyard, and they'd be really fresh. He says, but the other guy says, throw them away, and eat bricks and centipedes.
Yeah, bricks and centipedes.
Yeah.
Sort of a departure from what was there originally.
Yeah, that's not progress. That's not building from within. It's throwing it away. And Woodrow Wilson and those characters, and those people on our Supreme Court who have been reckless in their disregard of their oaths and their public duties, as Jackson said, they have stood out on the limb and then sawed it off from the foundation and the trunk of the tree. And I pray to God that at least some of what we accomplish on this show, in this podcast, is helping people rediscover those roots and those foundations.
It's definitely one of the goals. Is we've got to go back and understand. It's important to understand when you look at the Constitution what the worldview of the founders was, because the worldview they had influenced the words that they used. You know, it's like this idea of liberty and person, and we suppose in 2020 that we just don't know what those things mean anymore. But we would know what they mean concisely if we just took a moment to go back and understand the framework and the worldview that these men were working in. It'd be really easy to interpret what the word liberty and the word person means, and how we protect persons and that liberty.
You know, I guess we should close with this, but a good friend of mine is Justice Murdoch. He was on the Alabama Supreme Court, and he's retired now, but he made a statement about the importance of words. And when words are lost and they lose their meaning, we can't transfer the precepts from one generation to the next, because all of a sudden the word doesn't mean what we think it means anymore. And when you can't do that, he says, the rule of law is lost. Yeah. Because I don't know what a person is anymore. I don't know what life is anymore. I don't know what liberty is anymore.
That's good.
And so what I'm hoping that we will do through the Rule of Law Life Act and the Marital Contract at Common Law Recording Act is that we will force the court to go back, force our legislators to go back and look at some of those fundamental principles and begin correcting some of the wrongs.
Well, and with that, as we close, I would encourage everyone to go back and listen to, I think it was episode 21. We had an interview with a guest, Professor Adam McLeod from Faulkner University, and we talked in great detail and at length about the common law and some of these, historical ideas and contexts that we had. It was just a fascinating discussion. It was great to listen to the two of y'all talk. For me, I'm just kind of the guy sitting here like, well, this is brilliant. But that's a great episode, I think, for everyone to go back and listen to. And also, another thing, wanted to let everyone know that David's book, The Politics of Loving God. We now have that in digital format. It's available for the first time on Kindle, Apple iBooks, Google Books, everywhere where they're selling digital. Barnes & Noble, Nook. So encourage you to go out and take a look for The Politics of Loving God. It's a really great book. And honestly, a lot of the things that we talk about here on God, Law, and Liberty, those things came out of, your heart and the things writing Politics of Loving God. So,
and for any who are skeptical, the proceeds of that book, 100%, go to FACT. They're not going into
goes
my
to
pocket.
David's new Mercedes.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, my new. No, it goes to FACT. So you want to know how you can support FACT and get something of benefit to you directly, buy the book, and the money goes to FACT.
Well, thanks for that, David, and thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you next time.
See you next week.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your friends to subscribe too. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen to podcasts. God, Law, and Liberty is a podcast of the Family Action Council of Tennessee. We are a 100% supporter-funded nonprofit advocating for family, life, marriage, and religious liberty. For more information, please visit us at www.facttennessee.org. That's FACTennessee.org. And please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at FACT Tennessee.